Hey y'all. I've got a couple of videos up in the channel, and I've got a few more waiting in my editing backlog. But before I posted any more of those, I thought it might be a good idea to take a few minutes and kind of explain why I'm doing what I'm doing, or why I'm going about it in the way that I am. In case it hasn't become painfully obvious in watching the videos I already have up, I'm not entirely comfortable with this medium of expression. I don't like talking to a camera. You see, in conversation, I like to play off of what the person gives me. I like to check their face for reaction. I like listening to the subtle shifts in tonality when they're speaking with me. I like responding to the active engagement of someone else's thoughts. So this isn't really conversation. In writing, I like sitting down and constructing a chain of thought, ultimately for its own sake. I like working through a concept from as many angles as possible. I have by and large spared you the more arcane elements of my compositional style in my general writing. And these two together are kind of the point, kind of why I'm recording these videos. Because it's a medium that I'm not comfortable with. And I think that that in and of itself has value. I think that there is value in engaging in something that you know you're not very good at. I think there's a lot to be said for doing things that you know you don't already possess the necessary skills for. And in this, in having a conversation that is not a conversation, that is spoken, not written, I'm very much out of my element. Regarding writing and these videos, it's worth noting that all of these are ad-lib. I only ad-lib, because that's kind of the point. That's kind of the point of why I'm doing these. To stretch my personal capabilities a little bit, maybe get out of my comfort zone a little bit, because when I'm sitting with a pen in my hand, or sitting in conversation with someone I can actually see, I am very comfortable. And in that kind of context, it's very easy to just rest on what we've already concluded, what we've already done, and more to the point, rest on the idea that the way that we approached them, the way that I approached these ideas that I've already formed, is in and of itself validated. You know, if I can sit down and write out a concept, and I can write it out in a particular way, I am dealing with both the concept with which and a medium with which I am comfortable. And this really limits my capacity to look at it objectively, or at least from multiple angles. So that's part of why I'm doing this. So that's a little bit about the why as far as the medium. Now, I am primarily a writer. This is strictly a side project. It will remain strictly a side project, and what you're hearing here, what you get here, is kind of my footnotes. That's got to be a surreal experience, listening to the footnotes for a book you're not reading. Oh boy. Sorry about that. But regarding the subject that I address through this all too uncomfortable medium, part of the reason that I go about this the way I do, and you might notice I bounce back and forth a little bit between differing issues. The reason that I do this is that I do feel these issues, I do believe, and I think I can rationally demonstrate that these issues are connected, that they are interdependent. But they are rarely addressed as such. They are very rarely addressed as such. When one generally talks about religion, for example, one generally talks about it in an almost purely religious context. Specifically, and especially when one is talking to a person who has some common views. When a Christian is talking to a Christian, they generally talk to them in such a way that compartmentalization of issues is almost inevitable. When an atheist is talking to an atheist, we see much the same thing. Communication becomes almost purely referential. And the problem with this, and the problem that we see in this, in particular to how this impacts our discussions of philosophy, is that when we talk about philosophy, we often talk about it in such a way as if it is not relevant to anything except philosophy. There's perhaps some valid concern expressed among those who would say that philosophy is ultimately a game of language. The problem here is that these are subjects that are related. These are subjects that are related. One does not necessarily need to have a working knowledge of epistemology or phenomenology as disciplines and subjects of study unto themselves to understand social trend or to form an entirely valid opinion about social trend, mass media, a hobby horse of mine in particular, the relationship between popular science, mass media, and social agendas. You don't need to know about phenomenology or epistemology as discrete disciplines in order to form an opinion on this, and in point of fact, most people are more than happy to form opinions on these without knowing the first thing about epistemology, because it's not necessary to their view. My views on these subjects are informed by these philosophical disciplines. That doesn't make them any more valid, but it does give a different context. It does give a different context, and I think more importantly, it does demonstrate that one can form immediately relevant views based on philosophical precepts. One of my greatest concerns in public discourse, both here in person and in writing, is the increasing conclusion that strict, disciplined philosophical investigation is ultimately socially irrelevant. Now, depending on the circles in which one runs, it's entirely possible that you've never bumped into this. It's more likely that you have, at some point, bumped into the idea that philosophy is socially irrelevant. So, part of what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to get across, as I go back and forth between arguing, well, let's just take it through the list, arguing against specific atheist debate tactics on one hand, the epistemological impossibility of a completeness of knowledge on the other, Dharmakaya as a useful tool for biblical criticism, the church and social justice. Part of the reason why I'm bouncing back and forth, bouncing all around so much, is that I do view these as connected. And I would like people to know that these philosophical, these highly abstract ideas that I talk about are where my opinions on these other ideas are coming from. So, that's a little bit about the how, a little bit about the why, a little bit about the what. I just thought it would be nice to get an introduction